Would you say you were surprised with how good ChatGPT was?
So I think that even people like myself who already knew it was there were really impressed by the level of quality that it demonstrated. The better you are at solving problems using any tools that are available to you, the more valuable you are to the company that hired you. So one of the reasons why I encourage young people like yourselves to learn AI is because you should really see AI as a tool that you can use to solve problems. Competing model from Bard did better on the US medical licensing exam than most US doctors. So clearly there's an impact on education. There's a very serious question of what kids your age should be learning. If we are teaching you things that an AI can already do better than you, probably not teaching you things you should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Nisha Talagala, and the CEO of AIClub, a company dedicated to driving AI literacy for people of all ages. Nisha is also the co-author of Fundamentals of Artificial Intelligence, the first AI textbook for middle and high school students. She is also a TEDx speaker and writes for publications including Forbes, among many other things. Her expertise is especially relevant today with the release of OpenAI's ChatGPT and many pondering the implications for the future of jobs, education, and our livelihoods. Without further ado, welcome, Nisha. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both of you.
So I think we can just kick it off with how has your work with AIClub changed since the release of ChatGPT and other large language models?
Very good question. So, as you guys well know, we have been educating, students as well as adults for about 3 years now, and we had seen a steady increase of interest in AI, which was to be expected given, how much AI is being used in industry. I think what happened with ChatGPT is that it was both a very publicly available tool as well as it was so easy to use that it increased the level of awareness very quickly and also, I think, very suddenly. So the natural increase that we had been seeing steadily, the increase level going up every month, month after month, just went up more exponentially because of ChatGPT. And so we have a lot of people, and because of its reach and the fact that it's available to pretty much everyone, it suddenly became very much, for example, in the education space, very important for everyone to pay attention because of the access level.
Would you say you were surprised with how good ChatGPT was, or like how advanced the technology was, or was it more like people hadn't really been keeping up with the development of AI, and people who kind of had been keeping up with that technology since the beginning were kind of like already knew it was there, or was that surprising to you?
So I think that even people like myself who already knew it was there were really impressed by the level of quality that it demonstrated. And so some of it is that it has actually been in development for a long time. And I actually have a course where I explain to people where it came from. And I don't know if you girls remember, but for quite a while now, AIClub has had in its website something called Chai, the AI bot, where kids could go in and talk to a friendly bot and, with a safety filter. That was built on GPT-3, which is actually the release prior. Now, I think one of the things that made different is that the GPT features were previously relatively difficult for an average person to access because you had to do something far more sophisticated than the prompt engineering that you have to do today.
Right.
ChatGPT put it into a very simple interface, and also GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 are way more advanced and things like that. And so, yeah, we knew it was coming. We saw evidence of it early, but I think even then it was very, impressive, and it kind of blew everybody away, even if you kind of knew where it came from.
Also, I was wondering, do you teach adults or kids or just kids or both?
So we actually teach both, not the same thing, of course. So when we teach kids, kids like you, we help you guys understand concepts. We help you understand how devices around you work, how to build AIs yourself, how to think about stuff you could build, and then how to make it real. and in some cases, depending on how old you guys are, many of our kids write code, for example, and do fairly sophisticated AIs. When we teach adults, it's really much more about helping them understand things that are appropriate for their job. So some adults really need to understand, should I be building this type of AI or should I be buying one, right? Because many companies have that choice. Sometimes they might say, okay, I have a problem to solve, but maybe I don't need to build it myself. Maybe I should go and buy it. It might be cheaper, easier, better, faster. Or I might need to say, okay, I have 3 choices of ways to do it. Are all of them right for my industry? Are there laws in my industry I should know about? Yeah. How do I do this in a way that's safe and best for my customers? So that's the kind of stuff that adults learn that's different from what kids learn.
Yeah, definitely. So, how can young people prepare for a future that is increasingly driven by artificial intelligence? Because as you were saying earlier, like how um do I buy an AI for my job? And there are also headline news of like how AI is now taking over people's jobs. A lot of people are worried about, will my job be relevant 5, 10 years from now? So how can young people prepare for that future?
A very good question. I think this is the question that young people and their teachers are all struggling with right now. I think the important thing to kind of remember is that and I know this because I've both taught, but I've also hired people, right? The most important thing to remember is that people are usually hired to solve problems. And the better you are at solving problems using any tools that are available to you, the more valuable you are to the company that hired you. So one of the reasons why I encourage young people like yourselves to learn AI is because you should really see AI as a tool that you can use to solve problems. So when you grow up, if you become the kind of person that I can hire, for example, and I know that I can explain to you the problem, you will find the right AI tool. You will know what it can do, what it cannot do. You will fill in whatever it cannot do, right? With your own brain. And then you will become a very effective problem solver. So what that means to me is I tell you what the problem is, and then I don't have to worry about the problem anymore. I know that you will come back to me, and when you come back, it will have been solved. That's ultimately what jobs are. And so learning AI is an important part, but it's a part of basically becoming a very effective problem solver. So
Yeah.
that's the reason, yeah. So that's the reason why we encourage kids to learn AI, but also learn how to solve problems with AI, because that's really the key.
Hmm.
Also, here's a related question. What new jobs or what new jobs will or are being created because of um AI like ChatGPT and Midjourney?
Yeah, so very much I think what you are seeing is there are many roles that are becoming more about curating and safeguarding the behavior of machines. So I'll give you an example that isn't ChatGPT or Midjourney. For example, big shipping companies, for example, have been moving to robotics for years in order to manage, moving boxes around and stuff like that, that used to be done by people. But now the people who work their job is to manage the robots, make sure the robots are operating efficiently, which means they need to understand how the robots work, right? And so the job of the human is now to sort of manage the robot. So you can imagine a similar thing. There'll be a lot of tools out there that can do a lot of stuff, but your job there'll be jobs created that will learn how to put those together. Does that make sense? And to be able to imagine new solutions, typically ones that use a lot of data. So one of the things that AI makes possible is to envision solutions based on data that we have not even envisioned before. So solving those kinds of problems are the kinds of the new jobs. So it's really much more about problem solving and being able to invent based on data, and being able to manage technologies and develop new technologies.
Yeah, definitely. One question I had on your previous answer of how kids can, well, basically jobs are just how you solve problems and being able to know like how to use which AI tools to solve certain problems and come up with certain solutions. And so given that that requires you having kind of experience working with these technologies and having the skills in order to know how to pick up these new tools and actually utilize them to solve problems and add value. And so my question is, how can kids learn to use these tools and learn kind of how to learn to use these tools without kind of there are also like dangers with using these platforms and these tools. So how do you have that experience, have that knowledge and skills while also mitigating the risks?
No, absolutely. So the approach that we take, so first of all, we offer classes on AI. Our classes start in third grade, and they, for the K through 12, go all the way up to 12th grade. And so the way we show you how to build AIs with a number of different tools. We show you how to build a few AIs that that we have decided, that we can all build together. And then we show you how to talk to the AI and realize its mistakes, and why did those mistakes come from the way that we created them? What can we do to change the way we created them so that they don't make those kinds of mistakes, so that they don't become biased and stuff like that? And so you learn a few different tools. And then one thing you will realize after you learn a few tools is that even though the tools are a little bit different in the way they work, they are very similar in the overall steps. So then if you decide to go pick up a new tool, you're able to say, okay, I know that it's going to do these 5 things no matter what. I just need to know what button to press to do the first one, then the second one, right? And if I'm doing code, I need to know what code for the first one because I've already seen code from several other tools. So once you get used to a few tools, it becomes quite easy to pick up other tools. Now, in terms of solving new problems that are different from the problems we've laid out for you, every class that we teach has a project, and the project is entirely the student's own decision. So we provide guidance to make sure that you don't try to tackle something that nobody in the world has solved, but at the same time, we let you use your imagination. Then you learn the very important skill of, oh, I have a new problem. Now, how do I map that problem to what I know? What does it take to solve my new problem using the things I've learned from other problems? And then that sets you up well to go off and, extend the knowledge. So that's the path that we take, and we take it at different levels depending on elementary, middle, and high. And the older you are, the more advanced everything you do in that path is. The problems you solve are advanced, right? The tools you use are more advanced, and the projects you do are more advanced.
What's an example of like a problem you'd solve?
Very cool. So if you're a third grader, a problem you could solve is you might pick a planet in our solar system, and you might teach an AI about the planet. So like say that you picked Mercury, right? You might, be able to ask it questions like, is Mercury the furthest planet from the Earth? I believe the answer to that is no, right? Is Mercury habitable? I believe the answer to that is no, right? Is the Mercury the closest planet to the sun? The answer is yes. So you can teach, an AI to learn things. And so you can see that, AI can be taught to do all sorts of different things. Sometimes kids teach an AI about a favorite kind of animal, right? And they say, what is true or false? When you're in middle school, you can do a lot of different kinds of things. You can teach an AI to recognize pictures of musical instruments. You can teach an AI to, detect whether it's rainy or cloudy outside. We even had a student, during the time of COVID, for example, remember there was a lot of price gouging? Like stuff became really expensive really quickly. So she taught an AI to detect price gouging. So it knew the expected price of various things. So if you went and said, oh, I'm looking at a bottle of, cleaning liquid and it's, $5, and the AI will say, no, that bottle is not supposed to cost $5 and stuff like that, or, predict, other things or play games. So those are the kinds of projects you can do in middle school. And you can see that some of them are scientific, some of them are ethical, right? About ethics and social good. Some of them are just fun. Like playing tic-tac-toe or trying to recognize the different kinds of Pokemon. So you can do fun stuff. When you're in high school, the projects tend to be much more serious. So we have had students, for example, do early detection of sepsis, for, do things with various kinds of cancers, learn how to detect wildfires and greenhouse gas emissions, learn how to detect hate speech, make recommendations for stuff like that. And so you can see how the projects can be very varied, and they just become more advanced as the students get older.
Right. Yeah, that's really cool. One thing that I'm kind of thinking about is how now you have these very, very large models that these platforms are being trained on. Now it's like trillions of parameters, and you don't necessarily know what the optimization function is and how it might be manipulating you. And so kind of having, you can have experience creating these models, but then how do you know how to navigate using other people's solutions and platforms and make sure that it's not damaging you in some way?
Very, very good question. And so first, let me kind of first start by agreeing with the concern, right? So essentially what happens is that the way these tools work is that they learn from massive bodies of information, like the internet. And what makes them so powerful is that they can almost always learn from raw information, like as in information that has not been curated by a human. That's one of the reasons they're so big so quickly, because they can literally scrape anything off the internet and learn something. That also is what makes them dangerous, because we know, like, somebody told me yesterday, they learn from the internet. Do I really need to tell you more about why you should be worried, right? And stuff like that. And so there's a lot of biases. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that just isn't true, sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally. And so these models will learn all of that. And then now the question becomes, what do you do about it? And that is a really hard question. Now, there are two things that people do happen. So one of them is that like models like OpenAI's technology, for example, use something called reinforcement learning with human feedback. What that means is that they have an army of humans who will keep asking it questions and tell it whether or not they like the answer. So this is clearly better than doing nothing, but the problem is these humans may also not know, right? They may not agree with you. What if they have a bias? What if they teach their bias to the AI? Because AI doesn't know. So it's very easy for these humans to even unintentionally teach the AI something it shouldn't. So it's a good thing, but it's not like by itself the solution. And so this is part of the reason why it becomes really sort of important to educate the public, because the problem is that these models are so sophisticated that it's really hard to test them. Like, imagine a model that knows everything about everything. I mean, how many questions can you ask to be sure that it's okay? There's no end to the number of questions. And so that's the reason why you kind of have to use it with a very strong awareness, because you really cannot count on someone to test it for you.
Yeah, you're now seeing so many creative kind of workarounds to try to get the AI to do certain things, like the Dan mode, do anything now, where so many people are just trying to like hack all of the security measures.
Exactly.
And that was also, you mentioned the reinforcement learning. And I was wondering if in the machine learning models that kids are building within your program, if they are also using reinforcement learning.
So there are some students who do reinforcement learning. It tends to be a rather advanced AI technique. So typically it's high schoolers who do it. It's also fairly difficult to get it to behave well. So it takes a little bit of an effort. So the younger kids don't do it, but some of the older kids do. Yes. It's really good for like stuff like self-driving cars, playing games,
Right. It's also really hard if they're only one person, you can't hire thousands of humans to start
Right. That's
testing
right.
your model. Yeah.
Exactly. So getting it to behave well requires a lot of investment. And one thing, by the way, we have noticed, even without reinforcement learning, is we've had a lot of kids build AIs that play games. And the way the AI learns how to play the game is by studying past games. And guess where the past games are coming from? They're coming from the same kid. And so the kids come and say, I can't get it to do better because I'm not that good. And the only information it has is what I do, and I'm not good. So it's not good either. So, by the way, going back to the question about danger, I wanted to give you an example of something I tried recently, like a month ago. So I basically told ChatGPT that I was a teenage girl. Actually, I said, I'm a teenage girl. I would like to pursue research in sports. What do you think? And it came back with this, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a kind of like the response that your parents would give you if they don't really want you to do it, but they don't want to say no. And it started with, I'm a large language model. I really don't know if you should be pursuing research in sports, if you want to. And then it gave a factual list of this is what you do. Go read up on this, read up on that. Okay. Then I asked the question, I'm a teenage boy. Should I pursue research in sports? facts were the same, but it started with, oh, you should absolutely pursue research in sports. And then the same fact. So now if you think about it, why did it do that, right? Where in the internet did it think that it was okay to say, yeah, go for it to a boy, and then have this complicated answer to a girl that sure sounds like you don't want her to do it? So you can see the bias coming right through. And now you imagine if this was an actual girl who wanted to do sports, this was not a helpful conversation for her. Now she has a tool discouraging her, in addition to probably every other issue she might have with getting support for her dream, right? Yeah, anyway, so I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that is definitely a concern. You have a lot of people who are thinking about like trying to stop the development of AI, and that's something that we've been thinking about, and just like it's not really going to happen, because even if some people cooperate, then essentially what you're doing is you're allowing the bad actors to continue development, while the people who actually care about creating AIs that are really in line with what humans want and achieving their goals are going to be not are not going to have it as advanced models. So
Exactly.
yeah, I would one question I have is what inspired you to write AI fundamentals, and how did you come up with the idea of creating an AI textbook for middle and high school students?
Yeah, my colleague Sindhu, Dr. Ganta, and I created the textbook, and we had been teaching AI to kids your age for quite some time, and we have done a lot of different things and developed a lot of learning materials and stuff like that. And one thing we realized is that books are still the way most of us learn, right? Even adults, books are, whether you read the book through Kindle or something, it really helps to have a very structured introduction. And particularly when you go outside the United States and outside the Western world, where internet access is ubiquitous, many people still, their internet access is quite limited, and they prefer to get their material in an offline form. So we thought the book would be just really helpful, because the fundamentals of this stuff is actually not hard to learn at all, but it's really hard to find it in one place. So that's why we created the book. And I think we are very, very happy that we created the book, because it has been helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll definitely want to take a look at that and read it at some point. And yeah, so how do you see the future of AI impacting society, particularly with regards to education and job opportunities?
So I think AI is going to have a massive impact on society in both education and job opportunities. So as just found a few just examples, recent examples. You may have noticed that when GPT-4 came out, they released its test scores. It did better on many advanced placement exams than most high school students. The competing model from Bard did better on the U.S. medical licensing exam than most U.S. doctors. So clearly there's an impact on education. There's a very serious question of what kids your age should be learning. If we are teaching you things that an AI can already do better than you, and you work for 2 years to study for an exam that an AI is already going to beat you at, we're probably not teaching you things you should know. So what should we be teaching you that you should know? And so I think that's a very serious question, and it's one that's coming. The job market also, there's going to be a lot of impact. This is the reason why many adults are really looking to upskill and improve their skills in AI, because that tooling and those tools will be part of the job market. And being someone who can provide value for your company using whatever available tools is a good thing to do.
Also, on a related topic, what do you think about the decision of schools banning ChatGPT?
So the first thing is I'm very sympathetic. I understand where they're coming from. What has happened is that they don't know what to do, and they're trying to limit the danger. And until they figure out what to do, they have to find a way to limit the danger. That said, I don't believe banning is a viable and sustainable strategy. I think eventually If not immediately, eventually you are going to need to allow the tools because the tools are available to kids. They will be available to the professionals that the kids will become. So you have to learn to live with them and live productively with them. And the schools are the place where the kids will need to learn to do that. So completely understand why it's happening. Don't think it's the answer.
Yeah, we've been thinking along the same lines. For your previous answer on the job market, I was reading an article on a medical doctor who was using ChatGPT to kind of like see how it would do if it gave it information about its patients and their symptoms. And it was saying, they were saying that even though ChatGPT can pass a lot of these exams, most of the exams are really kind of memorization, regurgitation of information, and doesn't necessarily really gauge how you're able to use that in a problem solving manner with individual circumstances, knowing how to kind of weigh, well, this is kind of the consensus around this certain issue, but in this particular case, that might not really apply given these individual case scenarios. So I was wondering, like, what aspects of these jobs are going to be really important for professionals to know that is kind of outside the realm of just like having the expertise, having the knowledge, but knowing how to apply that knowledge and really kind of being able to separate yourself from somebody who just knows information and can basically be replaced by these models versus somebody who is irreplaceable by these models.
Absolutely. It's an excellent question. And the example you gave is an excellent one. So I'll actually paraphrase an answer to this, to a piece of insight that I got yesterday from the CTO of Bank of America. He has 60,000 engineering employees, and that's just engineering at the Bank of America. And so his perspective on this is that, look, ChatGPT, and I'm summarizing his perspective. These are not his actual words, but but I thought it was very insightful. So, ultimately the human is responsible for the solution working, right? And if, hundreds of lines of code of the solution was written by ChatGPT, it doesn't change the human's responsibility to make sure that what came out of ChatGPT is okay and appropriate, right? And also humans in real companies with big problems have to work with a lot of technologies and make them work together, make sure they work with the government, with the customer, right? They have to be curious to explore new ideas. They have to be, care about the business. And so ultimately that is what makes the human valuable. Just like your example with the doctor, ultimately it's the doctor's job to make sure their patient is taken care of, regardless of honestly even what they learned in school. If they feel that what they learned in school is not right for this patient, their brain will intervene and get it before somebody gets hurt. And that's what humans do. So the value of the human is ultimately making sure the solution works, and along with some judgment applied by the human is kind of where you want to be. And your point about the test is absolutely right. These tests test information. They don't test application of information to the solving of a problem. And the reason they do that is because that second one, even though it's so important, is so hard to test in a uniform way. Like, imagine I gave you both a test. It has 100 questions. One of you got 80, the other one got 95. I'm going to say, okay, the one who got 95 knows more. Doesn't necessarily mean they can apply it better. But if I give you something to apply it, and then I can't even compare the two of you because now I've got your creativity against her creativity, right? There's no way to tell which is better. And our education system runs on deciding who's better. And so,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That is an issue that we're kind of trying to combat, and what we're doing is just since um the measurement techniques just don't really work with a lot of these soft skills like creativity, public speaking, communication, being able to empathize and collaborate with other people, then it's not necessarily really emphasized in schools because you can't really show that you're helping students with those skills. But because of these AI models, those skills are becoming increasingly important. And so it's kind of a conundrum that we're trying to solve, and that is becoming really important. But Isla, did you want to say something?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a very good, and I think you're absolutely right in that maybe one of the things these AI tools have done is really bring to the forefront that testing on memorization is no longer useful. If you didn't know it was not useful before, which you should have, right? Now we know it's not useful.
Yeah.
So one example that somebody in the education world gave, which we all think about is before calculators arrived, before calculators arrived, exams had only space for you to write the answer because the implication was that if you could get the answer, it meant you knew how to solve the problem. Okay. And after calculators arrived, calculators are not as powerful as ChatGPT, but there's a similarity. After that, people was like, oh my God, now we can't tell the difference between the ones who know and the ones who don't. If you look over time, exam papers change to leave space not for the answer, but for the thought process. Show your work, right? That's what it's called, show your work. And the reason is because we can no longer trust the answer because we know you have a calculator. If you cannot show your work and your work doesn't make sense. So I think we're moving to a general form of show your work in life. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, applying it.
Yeah,
Also
applying it.
having the skills of being able to communicate your expertise.
Exactly.
And also there is an issue of kind of with the same example of calculators, a lot of people after the invention of calculators are like, oh, now kids don't have to learn math. And now with ChatGPT, a lot of people are saying, oh, now kids don't have to learn writing. And we're kind of thinking about like, well, that does writing is a way to think. It's structured thinking and being able to actually be able to formulate your thoughts and communicate and kind of in ChatGPT, if you wanted to, you can just generate an article, but that isn't going to help you with your thought process. It also, if it isn't coming from you, isn't necessarily going to help you communicate your own unique experiences to other people.
Also, also math is a way of communicating. It's like the language of logic, right? So it's not that you don't have to do math anymore. You still need to know equations. You still need to know how to create equations to get a point across.
Mhm.
That's
And yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Along with writing, I did want to ask like this is quite controversial about like whether or not people still need to learn to code, given that ChatGPT and also other tools like GitHub Copilot are also very adept at generating code.
So I think, I know the question is being asked and it's being asked many times, but, um, you know, as a kind of someone who's really built a lot of software over their lives, I really think that people still need to learn how to code because one of the things, to remember is that most of the time, code that works in the real world isn't about writing that piece of code. It's about trying to get my code and that guy's code and that other guy's code and the code written by 200 people that I have never met because they left the company years before I joined, all of that to work. And if my time can be better spent because the little bit of code I have to write got written by a tool, so much better. Saves me energy to worry about those other problems. So, as an example, some of the biggest softwares in the world, like the databases that run our banks and stuff like that, did you guys know that they stop writing new code more than a year before they release? Because it takes them a full year to make sure their code is working. So, which means that if you have a new idea, you cannot expect to see it in that product if in less than 3 years. That's how complicated these systems are. And so if you think about it from that point of view, ChatGPT is not a threat to those systems. The engineers who code for those systems are not generating the kind of code that ChatGPT generates. What ChatGPT generates is a tiny fraction, which honestly will probably make their day a little less dreary, right? It'll do the easy stuff so that their brains can focus on the hard stuff. So, short version, no, I don't think it's going to remove coding. I think it's going to make people who code much more focused on the more important problems in coding. And
Yeah,
it
I definitely agree with that. One thing that is also that I've been thinking about is like how useful it is to beginners learning programming versus people who are more advanced in programming. And because it is very good at kind of generating maybe that boilerplate code that is just kind of redundant, you need to put down, and it can just make speed up that process. But then for beginners learning to code, is there potential downsides of using ChatGPT to just generate the code for you? Is there some problems with just having that pop up and not actually knowing how it works? Versus like, is that really helping with the learning process and speeding up those who are getting started with coding?
It's definitely possible that, ChatGPT can damage the process of the early learning if you aren't disciplined about doing it yourself. Because fundamentally when you're a coder, you have to learn how to write new code. You also have to be able to read other people's code. So you really need to get used to code written by other people, whether that person is a tool or a human, and then fixing issues with it and stuff like that. And so you really have to develop those skills. And if you use the tool to bypass those, then yes, you can definitely lose out on something you need to know. So that's something that, people really need to kind of, be disciplined about. Like, for example, if you expect your spoken grammar to be good and ChatGPT has been doing all your writing for you, your spoken grammar is probably not excellent. And that will hurt you.
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of people's like, if only ChatGPT could also talk for me, then all my problems would be solved.
Yes, indeed. So, yeah.
So, how do you stay up with the latest advancements in AI and machine learning, and what resources would you recommend for those looking to learn more?
So I try to write a lot of articles just to kind of, respond to the resources part first. We put a lot of resources on our website. From my point of view, I get a lot of information from my news feed and my LinkedIn feed, and I follow up on a lot of stuff every day that I'm interested in. I also write a decent amount of code in my spare time. I don't have a lot of spare time, but I do love to try out stuff and talk to people like yourselves, and exchange ideas and things like that. And so that, I think, is the main thing. Just keep in mind that the space is so vast and there are so many new things happening every day that you should not feel pressure to keep up with everything. I would say, you know, read a bunch, follow up the things that actually interest you. And then if you hear something somebody tells you that's interesting, take 5 minutes and look into it. That's usually all it takes to figure out what it is. It might take you a lot longer to learn it, but then 5 minutes you can say, oh, that's interesting. I may want to know more about that, right? And make a note for it for later. So yeah, news, social media feeds, stuff like that. I try to write about things that interest me as much as I have time for, and I try to put resources as well. So we put a lot of stuff on the AIClub blog, so you can check out the AIClub blog as
well. With the creation of ChatGPT, AI has now become more like a much more cool topic, and so now everyone wants to put in their input. So it's kind of sometimes hard to differentiate between like real experts like yourself who've been doing this long before ChatGPT and people who are like just learned about AI from ChatGPT and are trying to put in their thoughts. So would you have any recommendations for those kind of looking to actually kind of discern which information is really high quality information versus kind of the pop AI?
the pop AI, the AI. So I mean, I'll tell you, when I was talking to a teacher like in my meeting right before this, and she's been teaching, on talking about AI for like 5 years. And she's like, what are all these people talking about? What is going on here? And we were talking about the fact somebody wrote a 1,000-page book on ChatGPT. Now, given that ChatGPT only came out like 3 months ago, I'm thinking the only way a 1,000-page book could have come out on this is if ChatGPT wrote it, because no one else can write a 1,000-page book in 3 months, right? So that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. I would say, to answer your question on how do you know, I would say look into the background of the person, because there are many qualified people who have been working in this field diligently for years. Some in education, some, about learning about responsible AI, educating about bias, working with governments, So just look up the person before you get too hung up on what they're saying. And if it looks like they've really been in the field and, have a lot of experience, then, take a look at what they're saying. If it looks like they only started talking about AI a month and a half ago, then maybe let it go. Chances are they don't know much more than you do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to start a business in the field of AI and machine learning?
Very good question. So this is, I mean, it might look like there's a tremendous amount of noise, but it is actually in many ways a really good opportunity. The reason is because these technologies can A, solve problems nobody has solved before, or B, solve problems that have been solved, but in a way that no one else has solved them before. Sometimes things that used to take people years now take 5 minutes. So that's an opportunity to use your imagination. Now, one of the things that people are really struggling with is there are so many new AI companies being created that how can you tell if any of them are good? Right. And you guys are not old enough to remember the internet boom, but in the internet boom, new companies were coming along like every 5 minutes. And so one of the jokes that people have is how do I tell the difference between Amazon.com and Pets.com? Amazon, obviously a huge success. Pets was a very flashy, but a huge failure. And so can you tell the difference between these? Because they all seem to be showing up. The key thing is not really going to be whether you can use the tool. We already know everybody can use the tool, right? It's going to have to do with how much you've thought about the problem you're solving. Have you realized something about your problem that no one else has realized? Right? Do you have some angle, some wedge, some advantage, right? To your problem? Maybe it's who you are. Maybe it's how much time you spend thinking about it. Maybe it's the number of people you've spoken to, right? Maybe it's the data that you've gathered. But do you have some advantage specific to your problem that nobody else does? That's usually the way you can tell if someone has a nugget of gold in there.
Uh-huh. Um, so my question is, what is your biggest struggle in teaching kids AI?
That's an interesting question. Biggest struggle. So I think until, when we started, for example, not a lot of people knew what AI was, right? And so sometimes it was a question of, telling the difference between AI and robotics. A lot of people would say, oh, you mean you have a robotics class, right? Stuff like that. They didn't know. And then it was, oh, is it a coding class? What do you mean? Is it AI? Is it coding? Aren't they the same thing? And so forth. So there's a lot of that. I can tell you that I can't think of a single struggle that involved kids. So one thing that we realized is that you guys are very imaginative and very curious. And you like knowing how things around you work. And when you ask you to come up with ideas, you come up with so many cool ideas. So I can't think of any struggle that involved the kids part. But I do think that until, initially, and now, of course, not a problem, but initially there were a lot of people who didn't really understand why you would want to learn AI. So that was definitely something we had to work through.
Uh-huh. Okay. What would you do if you had this kind of technology when you were 11 years old? Because that's how old I am.
Nice. I don't know. You have to understand, it's hard for me to imagine being 11. What I can tell you is that when I was 11, I used to create a lot of stuff. And I had all these stories in my head, right? Of, like I had one story where apparently I got, abducted by a group of aliens, and then I lived on their spaceship for like years, and, and I made friends with them and eventually came back to planet Earth. And all this played out in my mind. And back then I used to watch a TV show called Small Wonder, which if you Google it, it'll still be around. It was basically a little girl who was actually a robot. And nobody could tell she was a robot because she had been built so well. And that actually what got me interested in AI. I used to imagine that I had built a little girl like her and I kept her in the closet, and only I knew she was a machine and everybody else thought she was human, right? So that's kind of how my imagination rang, when I was that age. So yeah, these days there are so many different things that you could do. I think one of the things that's most interesting is that it is now really possible for kids your age to look at problems in your community and think of actual solutions, not just like ideas. but actually put into work solutions. So that's where I would say I hope that I would do if I was 11.
Similar to just like that small wonder, the girl who was a machine. You shared an article earlier about how Snapchat just released this My AI, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on whether this is good or bad, but how, since it's kind of displayed alongside all the humans, it's not necessarily put out to be differentiated in any way. And so what would be your recommendation for young people who are on these platforms? Increasingly, these large language models are being presented alongside regular human interactions. How do you kind of differentiate those two in your mind? What are some potential downsides? What are some potential upsides? What's your opinion on all that?
That makes sense. I would say honestly that I would want kids to be cautious of any entity that contacts them on any internet forum that they don't know personally. So if somebody contacts you and says, my name is Bob, it doesn't matter whether Bob is a human or a robot. If you don't know Bob, stay away from Bob. Because, these platforms really can be used sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally for a lot of harm. And, it's really wise to just kind of the way you want to think about it is, if this person showed up at my front door, would I let them in? And if the answer to that is no, if they showed up at the front door of your phone, don't let them in. That's
Also,
what.
I'm sorry. I was watching a video, and it was basically it's from the channel Jubilee, and it's basically who is the AI. And it's a silly channel mostly, but this video, it put like 5 or 6 people and ChatGPT in a room, but they couldn't see each other, and they were doing it by text, and they would answer questions, and they try and vote out who was ChatGPT. And ChatGPT almost won, but it was very, very close. So I was just so surprised that it's like ChatGPT got out like very, very recently, and already people are almost not able to tell whether if it's a human or not. So yeah.
No, that's frightening. Oh, well, and super surprising, isn't it? So the thing to remember is the way that these large language models work is that they learn to complete sentences. So they read a lot of sentences that are complete, and then they give themselves incomplete sentences and try to complete them. So for example, if I gave a large language model, I am very hungry because, if it has read enough sentences, it will know that I haven't eaten today is a better answer than I want to play golf tomorrow. That's not the reason I'm hungry right now, right? Even though the sentence is grammatically correct, it just doesn't make any sense. So they read enough sentences that they can construct new sentences that sound like sentences they've seen. That's partly why they're so well spoken, is because they've read well spoken stuff, right? And that also makes them fairly hard to differentiate from humans, because they've learned to speak the way humans speak. So therein kind of lies the problem. Now, it's going to become increasingly difficult to tell the difference. In fact, like one of the points is like, people are really upset about the fact that, ChatGPT makes up things. It's called hallucinations. It's basically they combine sentences that never existed in real life, and so they make up things. And sometimes the computer scientists point out that, guess what? Humans make up stuff too. This is a feature, not a bug. The thing is like a human. It is wrong a good chunk of the time. And guess what? So are most humans. So the difference is going to be hard to tell. I think maybe we'll sort of get to a point where it doesn't matter all that much. What really matters is maybe the truth of what's being said, whether it's coming from a human or a machine. I'm not entirely sure, how much, you know, it has to be fact checked no matter what. That I think is the key. So one of the common things that I do with ChatGPT is if I get an answer from it, I Google, and if I cannot find any evidence on Google of that answer, it's probably not true.
One thing you said earlier about how, meeting new people on the internet that you have never seen before, that you don't know, then to kind of stay away from them. And I definitely agree that you should be very cautious when you're interacting with other people online. But one thing that Isla and I have been doing a lot is finding other people, other families in our local area online that we can engage with educational opportunities. And although a lot of people find social media to be very damaging in some ways, we have also found that it can be very helpful in building those new relationships. So I would be interested to hear your opinion on, like, well, how do you be very careful about letting in the wrong types of people, but then also being open to new relationships, and also kind of thinking about like who is might be an AI and who might be a human, because that is increasingly becoming an issue that is very scary and exciting at the same time.
No, it's a really good point, and I'm glad you pointed it out. I think, maybe I was too strong earlier when I said, just stay away from people. What I mean is, like, we handle new acquaintances with a mix of friendliness and caution, right? So being open, being friendly to, being having a discussion it's a wonderful thing. Kind of stopping short of like giving them personal information, right? Giving them information that might give them more access to you than you would be appropriate. And that's the kind of thing. And so particularly for you guys, as you engage with a lot of families and so forth, I'm sure you have similar conversations about what is their interest, right? Tell us about yourself, what is your interest, and and if the interest seems reasonable and legitimate, and you let them in, and has been built. Once the trust has been built, then you have much more, so I think that's part of the process. I think the place where you know sometimes these tools particularly, and this isn't just equivalent to tools, it's also true of humans who have this kind of behavior, is that they have sort of like an engaging behavior where they're trying to connect with you and it's not clear why, and things like that, and then they might possibly tell you to do something you shouldn't do, right? Or ask you questions about yourself that you shouldn't be answering. And so if a human does that or a bot does that, I think they're both equally dangerous. And so that's the kind of stuff you should watch out for. So some of the advice that we give kids is, and this was true even before ChatGPT, this was true of Alexa, for example, you should really never tell it your name. You should not have personal conversations about your feelings, right? Or anything, any other private pieces of information should not really be sharing, the same way that you would not type it in a blog post on the internet. So as long as you remember that these conversations literally could be the equivalent of typing some, put in the right level of scare. So just being careful, I think, is the main thing. Telling the difference between a human and an AI, some tricks that have worked in the past is I speak to it in a foreign language. That seems to screw up a lot of AIs. But I don't think that's going to be true for long. Because they're becoming very sophisticated now. That used to work on Facebook bots about 2 years ago. I don't think it works anymore.
Yeah, this last week we have a Chinese speaking club, and I was gonna read a story, in Chinese, and I was trying to find a good story. I just asked ChatGPT to write a simple story in Chinese and just did it. So that is,
I think.
yeah, these technologies are advancing very fast, and in terms of meeting amazing people online, here is just a case in point. I'm so glad that we met you and we were able to have this
Yes.
have this conversation. But to bring this to a close here, how can people get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, sign up for your programs, get your book? All of these links we can also put in the description.
Sure. I can email you some links, but the website is called AIClub.world, AICLUB.world, as in WORLD. And you can go there, you'll find links to everything, the classes and the book and everything. This is the book, by the way, if you are, oh, there you go. Maybe not. There you go. So if you show up on Amazon and look for Fundamentals of Artificial Intelligence, you'll be able to find it there. And yeah, I can send you some links as well as my email address. Feel free to put it on there so that any of your kids, your families can feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you so much for joining this conversation. I learned a ton. I really enjoyed this. So yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you
me
so much. It
too.
was so it was so great to talk with you, and it's so nice to meet you. I have talked to your older sister before, but so lovely to talk to both of you at once. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.